Hello again. Now, over 2 million people go to bed hungry in South Africa. That's according to statsSA. With a high cost of living, a lot of households find themselves battling to keep up with food prices. What impact does high inflation have on food security, for example? Chief economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, Wandile Sihlobo, joins us now to explore this. Wandile, good afternoon. Welcome to today. Each time we speak about food insecurity in our country, I think of two other words, which are hunger and starvation. Can we start there? Your research, your data, what are you seeing in terms of numbers?
So, Bredan, when we think about food security in general, we typically consider a couple of things, which is the availability, affordability, as well as the nutritious value of that food. And of course, in South Africa right now, what we see is that roughly 6 million South Africans can be deemed as food insecure today. And that's, of course, a major challenge. And when one looks at that to say, where are the problems coming about, I do think that the affordability is increasingly becoming an issue. And of course, it's not only caused because prices are rising at a much faster pace, but also the fact that a number of households in South Africa are out of work. So when there is no income, regardless of where certain goods can be priced, the pressures are there.
You know, there's always a perception, Wandile, that this is a land of plenty. But I mean, so many people, I mean, in my intro there, I've said 2 million people go to bed hungry. And it shouldn't really be happening.
Bredan, you are correct in a sense that this is a land of a plenty. I mean, each year in South Africa, we are exporting roughly 51% of what we produce in value terms. Last year, that was about $12.8 billion. But again, this is exported so that the businesses and the individuals that produce, they can be able to earn a certain amount of income and still be able to run their businesses the next year. To deal with this issue then of hunger, we have to say why are the underpinning issues, which is where I was saying it's not so much when you look at it over the long period, an issue of a price, but more so a challenge which has to do with the fact that most South Africans are out of work. And you see that with our high unemployment numbers. And when they're out of work and they don't have any income, even if a loaf of bread can be dropped to whatever particular number, a bag of maize meal can be dropped to whatever particular number, when there is no income, there will always be pressures. Then how we have to deal with it is, of course, there's an agricultural angle and a food production angle, but more so we have to be thinking about how do we make sure that the households have income, people are at work. And I think a combination of that social policy can assist in getting us through the difficult times.
So we have a very difficult situation regarding, as you said, accessibility to food for millions of South Africans, and affordability, as you've stated several times now, it's another big issue. But what about nutrition? I'm thinking here, Wandile, just bear with me for a second. What we saw happening just now after the Easter break in KZN, with millions of pupils not accessing their only meal per day just to get one nutritious meal a day. It just shows how tough it is. In this picture of food insecurity, we can't forget the significance or the importance of good nutrition, which many people can't afford because some of the fast foods is very cheap.
Yeah, I think, Bredan, the story about nutrition is, you rightly place it, is very important for well-being. And I think where one looks at it on this thing on a day-to-day basis is always on a sense of saying, are the South African farmers producing the food that is nutritious and able to meet the quality standards to be consumed by its citizens and the global citizens that import food from South Africa? And are food processors of South Africa processing this food in a certain higher standards to ensure that it meets all of the health and the nutritious requirements? And I think on that, the answer is yes. In as far as I can tell, we're able to do that. But then the issue of access, which was the KZN matter, whereby the feeding schemes is not delivered to certain areas, and the story of affordability, where households' incomes are very low or there's literally no income in other households. That's the social policy which I was talking about, to say those that are responsible for ensuring that the businesses can thrive and create jobs. That's the elected officials. They have to do their part on that. And those that are responsible for taking care and delivering products to the schools, they have to do their own part on that, because those that are sitting in the production side of the food, I think they are applying the right principles, and we are able to ensure that there is nutritious food available. But then the affordability, distribution, and the others in these households and the schools that we're talking about, it's a responsibility that the public officials should have done. And of course, we learned with sadness about what happened in KZN.
Yeah, Wandile, I want to get your view on the following. You've mentioned it. We export a lot of food. I think you said more than 50% of what we produce. That's wonderful. You're earning dollars as a business. But it gets a bit complicated when the numbers you've mentioned earlier speak to the high degree of malnourishment in many households in South Africa, and of course destabilizes food security, or encourages or boosts food insecurity. What are your views about this complicated picture?
I think, Braden, there's one important thing here, and I want to stress this because it's critical when we think about South Africa. As a country, Braden, we are able to produce what we are producing dependent on some inputs that are coming from outside the world. Take, for example, fertilizer. South Africa imports roughly 80% of its annual fertilizer usage of just over 2 million tons a year. And we also import about 98% of our agrochemicals. You need these agrochemicals, I'm talking about herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and you need all of this to ensure that agricultural productivity improves and you are able to get the yields that we are producing and have the availability of food supplies in the country. Now, given all of these are imported and bought by private individuals, they have then to be able to sell their products and earn some bit of income so that the next year they can go and buy the inputs again. Because in absence of that selling of their product and earning some income to sustain their products, they will situation able to afford certain agricultural inputs that supports the availability of our food system. Because, but then I can never stress enough the fact that if we were not producing sufficiently domestically, the food insecurity question would have been far worse than what we are experiencing right now. And the causes of the insecurity that we are seeing now, it's not so much only that we have a runaway food inflation. Yes, we have challenges for the short term in as far as the prices rising much faster than we would have liked, but we have much more better availability. And I think if we can deal with questions of saying, how do you improve household income? And in areas where people can farm, they are supported, we will be able to deal with these dynamics that we are having. So the questions we're sitting with are not the agricultural questions, but rather more of the social and the economic questions of saying, how do you support the households? And how do you make sure that smallholder gardening, all of that is supported to supplement some of the household incomes in very
and possibly as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I know some countries have done it, Wandile. You can correct me if it's wrong. Whether it worked well or not, I'm not so sure. But I know that some countries have subsidized certain food products. Like here, we've got zero-rated, VAT, zero-rated products that the poor can manage to get in terms of affordability. Maybe there's more that can be done in terms of the retail sector, where many of us go and shop for our basic foodstuffs. You've told us that 6 million South Africans currently are food insecure. That's 10% of the population, if you look at the last census number of about 60 million. From your perspective or the information you have, Wandile, is this going to get worse?
So, Braden, again, the underpinning drivers or causes of this has a lot to do with the economic conditions of our country, and which is why the South African government had come up with all of these various support systems that are in place. Either it's a 350 grant or the social support grants to the elderly and the young. But those are the things that are there in the interim. And I think what we need to be thinking about is to say we also have a very large number of young people that are active and could be working and are out of work. And those people, we have to think about how do we bring them into work. And the difficulties there. I mean, the interventions are broad, but then because that speaks then with saying, how do you ensure that business activity is better? You're dealing with issues of infrastructure that are constraining growth, with issues of network industries, either it's ports, roads, rail, the rising levels of crime. You're thinking about investment, you think about the power issue that we are facing. So all of those are long-term challenges that are there, and I think that we need to think about as South Africans to deal with this. But quickly, Pretend, before we close, on are things going to get worse or what? I would say they're thinking about South Africa's food price inflation. This year, we will see prices, at least in my view, rising at a much softer pace compared to last year. I'm looking at a food price inflation this year averaging somewhere between 7 and 8%, while in 2022 it had averaged at about 9.5%. So prices will still be rising, but at a much softer pace. But when one shops in their basket, I think grain-related products, fruit and meat might be better compared to the overall other things that people put in their food basket.
Wandile Sihlobo, thank you very much. As always, a pleasure having you here on today. He's, of course, the chief economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa. We're talking about food insecurity in our country today. 6 million of us are food insecure as you speak. That's 10% of the population. It's a huge chunk of people.